How to raise resilient kids, like the ancient Greeks, without breaking them. In ancient Sparta, 7-year-old boys were taken from their mothers and placed into military training camps, where they slept on beds made of river reeds. They had to pick themselves, walked barefoot year-round, and were given so little food they were expected to steal to survive. If caught stealing, they were beaten not for the theft, but for being clumsy enough to get caught. This system produced some of the most fearsome warriors the world had ever seen. But it also produced a society that collapsed under its own rigidity, unable to adapt when the world changed around them. Meanwhile, just a few hundred miles away in Athens, children grew up in a completely different world. They learned music, poetry, mathematics, and philosophy, alongside physical training. They were encouraged to question, debate, and think independently. These children grew up to create democracy, advance science and mathematics, produce literature that we still read today, and build a culture so influential that we're still studying it 2,500 years later. The difference between these two Greek cities offers us something remarkable. Both believed in raising resilient children. Both lived in a harsh world where strength mattered. But one chose a path that broke children down to rebuild them, while the other chose a path that built children up through balance and purpose. And here's what's fascinating. The approach that created true resilience, the kind that could weather uncertainty and produce innovation, wasn't the one that looked stronger on the surface. Today, we're obsessed with resilience in our children. We worry they're too soft, too protected, too fragile for the real world. Some parents respond by removing all obstacles, smoothing every path, fighting every battle for their kids. Others swing the opposite direction, believing hardship itself builds character, that we need to toughen kids up. But what the ancient Greeks discovered through trial and error across their city-states was something more nuanced. True resilience isn't about hardship or protection. It's about something else entirely. Let me take you back to Athens in the 5th century BCE, when the city was at its cultural peak. A typical Athenian child's education began at home until about age 7. During these early years, both boys and girls were raised primarily by their mothers and household members. Already, this was different from Sparta, where the state claimed children early. Athenian families believed these early years built the foundation of character through relationships, stories, and observation. At age 7, boys began formal education. But here's where Athens diverged from every military culture around them. Education wasn't just about physical strength. The day was divided among 3 teachers. The grammatistes taught reading, writing, and literature. The Kytharistes taught music and poetry. The Paido tribes taught physical education and athletics. Notice the balance. 1/3 of education was intellectual. 1/3 was artistic and cultural. 1/3 was physical. Why this division? The Athenians had observed something crucial. Children who developed only their bodies became strong, but inflexible in thought. Children who developed only their minds became clever, but weak in spirit. Children who ignored the arts became competent, but lacked the cultural glue that held society together. True resilience required all 3 elements working together. The intellectual training taught children how to think, not what to think. Students memorized Homer and Hesiod not to learn facts, but to internalize examples of human nature, moral complexity, and consequences. They learned mathematics not for commerce alone, but to understand patterns and logic. They studied history to see how decisions rippled through time. The goal was to create minds that could analyze, adapt, and reason through novel situations. The musical and artistic training served a different function. Learning to play the lyre, sing in harmony, and recite poetry built patience, discipline, and emotional regulation. Music required listening, adjusting, and finding your place within something larger than yourself. Poetry taught rhythm, beauty, and the power of words to move people. These weren't luxuries. The Athenians saw them as essential to emotional resilience, the ability to process feelings, connect with others, and find meaning beyond mere survival. Physical training developed courage, endurance, and bodily confidence. Boys wrestled, ran, threw javelins, and competed in athletics. But unlike Sparta, the physical training wasn't about suppressing fear or ignoring pain. It was about learning your body's capabilities and limits, understanding that discomfort was temporary and manageable, and discovering that you could push further than you initially thought without needing to destroy yourself. Here's where it gets interesting. The Athenian approach produced measurable results. When Persian forces invaded Greece in 490 BCE and again in 480 BCE, it was Athenian citizen soldiers, not professional warriors, who played decisive roles at Marathon and Salamis. These were farmers, merchants, and craftsmen who had learned to think strategically, work together, and adapt to changing circumstances. They weren't trained from age 7 to follow orders without question. They were educated to assess situations, make decisions, and take initiative. After the Persian Wars, Athens entered its golden age. The same education system that produced effective soldiers also produced Pericles, Socrates, Sophocles, Euripides, and countless others who advanced human knowledge. This wasn't coincidence. The resilience they'd built through balanced education transferred across domains. A mind trained to question in philosophy could question in politics. A spirit trained to harmonize in music could harmonize in democracy. A body trained to endure in athletics could endure in war or crisis. But what about Sparta? Their system looked more efficient. Single-minded focus on military excellence. No distractions. Total commitment. For a while, it worked brilliantly. Spartan warriors were nearly unbeatable in conventional warfare. Their reputation alone could win battles. But this strength concealed a fatal weakness. Spartan education, the agoge, optimized children for one scenario: traditional hoplite warfare in a stable world. When that world changed, when warfare evolved, when diplomacy mattered more than intimidation, when economic and cultural power began to outweigh pure military might, Sparta couldn't adapt. Their education had built rigidity, not resilience. By the 4th century BCE, Sparta was in terminal decline. They couldn't adjust to new military tactics. They couldn't compete economically with other Greek cities. Their population was shrinking because their brutal system produced fewer and fewer citizens capable of surviving it. They'd built strength but not adaptability. They'd built warriors but not complete human beings. Athens had problems too. Democracy was messy. Their empire could be oppressive. They made catastrophic mistakes like the Sicilian expedition. But when Athens fell, its ideas didn't die. The educational philosophy spread through the Hellenistic world, was adopted by Rome, preserved through the Middle Ages, and became the foundation of liberal arts education that we still recognize today. So what can we take from this? What does ancient Athens teach us about raising resilient children in the modern world? First, resilience isn't built through hardship alone. Exposing children to difficulty doesn't automatically make them stronger. Spartan children faced enormous hardship, but it made them fragile in a different way. They could endure physical suffering, but couldn't adapt to changed circumstances. True resilience requires building capacity across multiple dimensions: intellectual skills, emotional skills, physical skills, social skills, ethical grounding. Second, balance is essential. In our world, we often specialize early. This child is athletic. That child is academic. This one is artistic. The Athenians would see this as creating incomplete humans. They believed you couldn't separate mind from body from spirit. A child who only exercises the body learns to solve problems with force. A child who only exercises the mind can become paralyzed by overthinking. A child who develops all aspects becomes adaptable. Third, the goal isn't obedience but judgment. Spartan education produced children who followed orders superbly. Athenian education produced children who could make their own sound decisions. In a stable, unchanging world, obedience might suffice. But we don't live in that world. Our children will face challenges we can't predict, use technologies that don't exist yet, and navigate social changes we can't imagine. They need judgment more than obedience. Fourth, learning should build connection, not just competition. Athenian education included competition. Athletics always involved contests, but it was embedded in community. Music was performed together, poetry was recited in groups, physical training happened in the gymnasium, which was also a social space for all ages. Children learned that they were part of something larger. This social resilience, the ability to build relationships, work with others, and find support, turned out to be just as important as individual strength. Fifth, culture and meaning matter enormously. The Spartans had culture, but it was narrow and militaristic. Athenian children absorbed stories, myths, history, and philosophy that gave them a framework for understanding their place in the world. This wasn't indoctrination. The myths themselves were full of complexity and contradiction. Heroes made mistakes, gods were flawed, justice was complicated. This taught children that life was nuanced, that they would need to think carefully about right and wrong, and that meaning came from engagement with these deep questions. How do we apply this today? We're not ancient Athenians. We can't reconstruct their world, but we can adopt their principles. Start with balance. Make sure your children develop intellectually, physically, emotionally, and socially. This doesn't mean overscheduling. It means paying attention to all dimensions of growth. A child who reads widely but never moves their body is developing incompletely. A child who plays 3 sports but never grapples with ideas is developing incompletely. A child who excels academically and athletically but has no friends or creative outlet is developing incompletely. Teach thinking skills, not just information. The Athenians didn't just fill children's heads with facts. They taught them to analyze, question, and reason. In our age of information overload, the ability to think critically matters more than ever. Encourage your children to ask why. Model curiosity. Show them how to break down complex problems. Let them see you change your mind when you encounter better evidence. Include the arts seriously. This is where modern education often fails. We treat music, art, and creative expression as optional extras, things to cut when budgets are tight or schedules are full. The Athenians understood that the arts develop different capacities than math or physical education. They teach patience, discipline, emotional expression, and the ability to create beauty. These aren't soft skills. They're essential elements of a complete human being. Build physical confidence without breaking the spirit. Children need to learn that their bodies are capable, that discomfort is manageable, that they can do hard things. But this doesn't require punishment or humiliation. The Athenian approach was to gradually increase challenges, to celebrate effort and improvement, and to help children discover their own strength. Physical education should build children up, not tear them down. Create opportunities for real responsibility. Athenian boys took on increasing responsibility as they matured, participating in religious festivals, athletic competitions, and eventually civic life. They weren't sheltered from the real world, but they weren't thrown into it unprepared either. Look for age-appropriate ways your children can take on genuine responsibility. Let them experience the consequences of their decisions in safe contexts. This builds the judgment they'll need later. Connect them to something larger. The Athenians embedded children in tradition, community, and purpose from an early age. What's the modern equivalent? It might be family traditions, religious or philosophical communities, service to others, historical awareness. The specific form matters less than the function, giving children a sense that they're part of something that extends beyond themselves in time and space. Foster social resilience, the ability to form relationships, work with others, navigate conflict, and build community is just as important as individual strength. Make sure your children have opportunities to work together on projects, play cooperatively, and learn to resolve disagreements. These skills will serve them throughout life. Here's what the ancient Athenians got right, that we often miss today. Resilience isn't about toughness alone. It's not about being hard or unyielding. It's about being strong enough to bend without breaking. It's about having multiple tools to handle challenges. It's about developing the judgment to know which tool to use when. It's about being connected enough to other people that you don't have to face everything alone. The Spartans built children who could endure anything but couldn't adapt to change. The Athenians built children who could think, feel, create, question, and grow. When the world changed, Spartan resilience shattered. Athenian resilience evolved. Your children will face a changing world. They'll need to adapt to circumstances you can't predict. They'll need to think through problems that don't have clear answers. They'll need to work with people who are different from them. They'll need to find meaning and purpose in their lives. These are the challenges that require true resilience. You don't build that kind of resilience through hardship alone. You don't build it through protection alone either. You build it the way the Athenians did, through balanced development of mind, body, and spirit, through teaching children to think, to create, to move, to question, to connect, through giving them roots in something larger than themselves and wings to fly toward their own potential. The ancient Greeks ran a 2,000-year experiment in human development across dozens of city-states. The ones that survived and thrived weren't the ones that produced the toughest warriors. They were the ones that produced the most complete human beings. That's the lesson we can still learn today. True resilience comes not from breaking children down, but from building them up in all their dimensions. Not from making them hard, but from making them whole.